motion or detail? This is exactly what we want to try and answer in this WebRTC Field of the Month. With me is Philipp Henke, and what we're going to do now is discuss the need to decide between motion and details when you're using WebRTC encoding for video channels, right?
Yes. I mean, video encoding is always a compromise between the available bandwidth and how to fit the most resolution or frame rate into the budget.
Okay.
And there is a WebRTC option called Content Hint, which lets you influence the behavior of the encoder in that case.
So I'm going to tell WebRTC what my content is like so it can know better how to encode it and send it over the network in the way that would fit my content.
Yes. Typically, you want to do that for screen sharing, where you typically want detail and not motion. But it also has some effect on the webcam feed. So you might want to play around with what we do in the Fiddle and decide what to do in your product.
Okay, so let's share the screen and see what we're doing.
Yes, so the Fiddle is a bit larger this time. Let's quickly walk through it. So we're including the graph library from the samples. We have a display area for local and remote videos. And we have several input options. One is for the bandwidth. We have a range between 32 kilobits per second, which is very low, and 512 kilobits per second, which is reasonably high bandwidth for up to 720p. We don't go for like 2 megabits per second because then you don't see a difference at all.
Okay, so we're going to give a user the ability to play with the bandwidth that he wants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which is to simulate the bad conditions.
Okay.
And we also have the option to choose between the content hint. The two defined values are motion and detail, and we have a way to unset it to get the default behavior.
Okay.
And we even have the option to play with the resolution, which we can't do in this Fiddle because the camera is already used by another application. So we can't change as much as we want. But if you do it in standalone, it should work.
Okay, so I see you twice here. That's because we're opening two local peer connection, one sending to the other, and then on the other one, I'm going to see what was received remotely. So I can see the source and what happened after the encoder, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, that's the part here, which is doing the local peer connection, which is pretty standard. We've done it before. And what we have after that is basically wiring up the bandwidth change dropdown, which is here. We change the encoding parameters max bitrate. We can change the content hint. If it's unset, we set it to undefined. Otherwise, we set it to motion or detail. And same for the resolution dropdown. We use apply constraints to change the bandwidth of the camera on the fly.
Okay.
And then we have a lot of graph helpers which do this graph stuff.
Okay.
It's pretty complicated, but not very important for what we want to explain.
So can you guide me through what we're actually seeing in the results?
Mm-hmm. So here we have the local video, and you can see 640 by 480. And here is the remote video. It is 320 times 240 because the bandwidth is pretty low. And in the canvas here, we see the send bitrate, and we configure it 60 kilobits per second, 64.
Okay, and then the next
have,
one based on the number is frame rate, I guess?
Yes, and you can see there was a drop initially, but currently it's pretty stable at 30 frames per second.
As long as you don't move.
I can move a bit more, but it is good at keeping. There you can see a small dip.
Okay.
Because previously I didn't move much, so the encoder didn't have to do much. And it could fit the budget pretty good.
And then we've got the last graph.
Yes, which is the received frame width.
Okay, so although we set it to 640, it's on 320.
Yes, because it can't really do 640 for 80 at 30 frames per second.
It can, but the result wouldn't look as good.
Well, let's try that. So
Okay.
if we want to enforce the resolution, we set a content hint of detail. And what happens then is that the frame rate drops, and you can see that the resolution is better, but it is stuttering a bit. And you can see it here, the resolution increased to 640 by 480, but the frame rate took a big hit, and it's going down to 5 frames per second. If I move a bit more, it will go down again. And the encoder is trying to do something, but it decided to drop frame rate, but keeps the resolution in this case.
Mhm. So you can see good video, but stuttering a bit, or
Yes.
broken.
Yes.
Okay.
And if we set it to motion, it will actually make the movement much more fluent. Let's do that. But as you can see, it's blurring a bit.
Mhm.
Again, which is the reduction to 320 times 240.
Because now it decides that I'm going to do 30 frames per second or more frames.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have enough bit rates for my budget. And this being the case, I'm going to reduce per frame the quality in order to be able to send or to use less bits per frame, because I need more frames.
Yes. And movement is reflected pretty well in that.
Mhm.
And you see the frame rate is at 30 frames per second.
Okay, so if I want to do 4K at 100 kilobits per second, no luck.
Well, you're going to have a hard time getting out even 1 frame per second.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so thank you for this, and see you all in our next fiddle next month.
Bye.
Bye.